everybody. I am Dr. Ingrid Honkala, Spiritual Awakenings International Advisory Board member and also a board member of SAIS Spanish Committee. Today, I am delighted to introduce our speakers on the Childhood Spiritually Transformative Experiences panel. And they are Kirsty Salisbury from New Zealand and Dr. Brian Sackett from Canada. Originally, we had a third speaker, Tamara Caller Richardson from the USA. But unfortunately, Tamara is not going to be able to be here with us today, but I know that she's definitely joining us in her heart. So now we're going to start with Kirsty Salisbury. Kirsty is a New Zealand-based spiritually focused life coach and end-of-life doula. She had a near-death experience at age 12 that changed her life. Kirsty became passionate about winning the conversation around death and the afterlife. She's the host of the popular Let's Talk Near Death podcast. And Kirsty is the author of 2 books, her latest, Dying Well, An Approachable Guide to Death. Let's welcome Kirsty Salisbury from New Zealand.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Ingrid. It is so wonderful to be here. Hello, everybody who is here joining us. What an amazing event this has been. We're only on day 1 and so much amazing content. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm just going to share my screen with us. Okay, so as mentioned, my name's Kirsty Salisbury. I had a near-death experience at age 12. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about that experience, sharing what took place, and then also some questions that I had following that near-death experience and what life was like for me as a child going through quite a significantly transforming experience. So I'll start back at the beginning. I just had my 12th birthday, so I was quite young. At the time, I didn't really have any formed ideas of the world. People often ask me, how did it change your life? But when you're 12 years old, you haven't got an idea of what you think life's about. You haven't really formed any perceptions around things of the world. So I just turned 12 and I was a gymnast at the time. So I spent most of my days upside down, spinning around in circles, having a whole lot of fun and really enjoying life. I have to say, when I look back, I think my life was pretty good. I was very happy as a 12-year-old. And I was at school one day. I was in the playground area of the schoolyard. I was spinning around bars. I stood up too quick. I hit my head on one of the bars. And I think that that's probably where this journey starts. We will never know if that's what it was that triggered this whole event to happen. But what happened was, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't bad enough that I felt like I needed to go to the sick bay or that I was going to get any nasty bruise or anything like that. I went back to school. I carried on. I thought life was completely normal. And then over the next probably 24 to 48 hours, I actually can't really remember. I started to feel quite lethargic. I started to feel quite tired. I then ended up going to bed very, very early because I just couldn't stay awake. Woke up in the middle of the night with a very, very unusual headache. So my headache carried on. It got worse and worse. And then I started to feel unwell. I took myself out of my bed. I collapsed on the floor and my mother came running in going, "What are you doing making all this racket in the middle of the night?" Because I was a very high energy child. It was quite likely that I was bouncing around my walls at 3 o'clock in the morning. That was actually something I'd probably do. So she came in to see what all the racket was about, found me collapsed on the floor. Fast forward a few more hours, I was then unconscious. They couldn't wake me up. The next morning, probably every parent's nightmare, still couldn't wake me up. So I got rushed into hospital. The next thing I remember is pretty much this, just being in a place of nothing. Now I've got a black screen up. I was in a place where it wasn't light, but it wasn't dark. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't loud. It wasn't silent. It wasn't anything. It was just nothingness. And so I remember being in this place and I remember thinking, what is going on? This is weird. Over my shoulder, I heard my father's voice. My father said to me, I need you to connect with me. I need you to grab my hand. And I thought, okay, this is all very strange. I tried to connect with him. He was not there. I couldn't find my own hand. I couldn't find my own body. And that was when I started to think something really unusual is going on here. So I'm looking for my body. I'm looking for my hand to be able to connect with my father, who was now starting to really plead with me. He's really starting to ask that I hold his hand and that I let him know everything's going to be okay. And it sounds a little bit unusual, but this overwhelming feeling of responsibility came through. This overwhelming feeling that I had to connect with him. I had to hold his hand, or the future was just not going to be how it needed to be. And I'm aware how that sounds. I'm aware how confusing this all was for me at the time. I put everything into it, into the point that I thought, okay, I'm actually going to die. I'm going to give my whole life, because it felt so important. And so I mustered up my energy and I pulled myself together, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do a countdown, and this could be the end of me. So I counted down 3, 2, 1, and I just gave as much focus, attention, energy as I could to connecting with this voice, which was my father's, which I couldn't find. I couldn't find my body to be able to connect with him. And I just put everything into it, 3, 2, 1. And then it was like there was this white light, this booming, silent white light. This whole environment changed. And I was in this place where it was white, it was loving, it was kind. There was just vibrations of, I'm going to say, energy. It felt amazing, like these waves of energy that would come through. And I noticed all around me were beings. There were directly in front of me about 6 or 7, and they were there. And they were like silhouettes. It was really unusual. I couldn't actually see any of their features. And so I was there trying to work out who they were. And it was almost like the harder I tried to see them, the more I wasn't allowed to. And I felt like off in the distance, there were so many more of these beings, of these people. They were people, but they didn't have any features. So I'm not quite sure what they were. At the time, I was just in it. I wasn't really asking too many questions at this point. I had been when I was in the place of darkness, in the place of nothingness. I had been questioning where I was, what was going on. But now that I was in this light, I was just there. I was fully present in this place with these beings around me. And I tried so hard to see their features, so hard to connect with them. And like I said, the harder I tried, the less I could do. I tried really hard, and then I woke up. I woke up in my body, and I was in the critical care unit of Auckland Hospital here. So what had happened on a physical level was, when I didn't wake up in the morning, my parents couldn't wake me up. They rushed me off to hospital, and they found that I had what we call an AVM on my brain, which is an arterial venous malformation, which basically just means that part of my brain hadn't formed correctly before I was born. You can't see it, so you don't know that this is taking place in your head. So when I was in the playground at school and I hit my head, we don't know whether that's what triggered it, what started everything to happen. But basically, the blood vessels in my brain hadn't formed correctly. They had started to bleed, and the bleed had caused a blood clot that started to bleed. It burst all of those vessels. My brain was bleeding. I was raced into the operating theatre, did emergency surgery there on my brain. And it was some point in that surgery that I think this experience happened. So I flatlined twice in the surgery. So when I woke up, they were like, wow, we really didn't think you're going to make that. I was resuscitated twice, and that's in my medical notes and everything like that. And I think what happened was, during that time when I flatlined, I had this experience, and I woke up in the critical care unit with tubes everywhere, and everything was just crazy. The nurses were racing around me. They were trying to help me. They were trying to explain to me what had happened. And it was like I knew what had happened. I didn't know details, but I just kind of knew. And I can remember lying in that ward in the critical care bed with machines going and beeping and all sorts of things, and just feeling, everything is perfect. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. And yet through the surgery, I'd had a massive stroke. They had operated and taken out a fair chunk of the problem in my brain. They'd found there were some other things going on as well. I'd had a massive stroke, so I was now paralyzed down the left side of my body and pretty much dependent on everyone else for everything. So I was lying there thinking, life is perfect. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. But I was also questioning, where did that light go? Where did those people go? Were those beings? It was like music. It was that love, those waves of just love and vibration and energy. Where did that all go? And why can't I have that? I want to go back to that. I want to go experience that again. And yeah, I was lying there in the hospital bed with a future ahead of me that I really just didn't know what that was going to look like. And then the healing started, the treatment started, the learning how to walk, how to do everything again started. And I entered into this journey of quite a lot of questioning. Like I said, they found some other issues when they went in. And so when I was able to get stable again, they then had to do all sorts of tests and operations. I ended up flying over to the UK for some very interesting radiation surgery, things like that. So the journey was really just starting at this point. But I was hanging on to this thing of, what was that experience? What just happened? Where is that light? Because I'd never experienced anything like that here, I guess, in this realm. And so my questioning really started. And I can remember lying in the hospital bed at 12 years old with hours and hours and hours of free time on my hands because I literally could not do anything. And my brain started to question, started to ask things. It started to ask questions like, who are we really? Because I had been in this place where my physical body was not doing so well, but I felt more alive than ever. Where when I'm lying in a hospital bed and I'm feeling like everything is perfect, just as it should be, where was I when all of this was taking place? So I started to ask these questions of, how can we be in two places at once? And who are we really? Are we our bodies, or are we that light experience that I just had? So I started to ask these questions about my body, physically, spiritually, how it all works. But then I also asked questions about, what is my body if my body never works again? If I can't walk again, or if I can't go and live a normal life, because we really didn't know at that point what was going to happen. If I can't do those things again, then who am I really? Why does that feel like that is okay? Why does that feel like that is the perfect outcome and that everything is okay? So lots of these questions, I started to question, what was the point of a body? Why would we have a body when we can go and have that light experience? Why would we need to work on our body? Why would we need to care about our body? If we can be spiritual beings and we can go and be in that place, and then how do we get there? Is it possible to come and go? So some really big questions for somebody who's 12 years old, paralyzed and lying in a hospital bed. My next question was all of this planned? Is this life planned? Because like I said, I really felt like everything was as it should be. So if that's true, then was all of this meant to happen? Was this okay? Did I plan this? Did God plan this? Who planned this? And how much control do we have in our lives if we can plan this? When does the planning happen? All of these questions that I had going around my head. Now, I will say I didn't get to too many answers at this point because I was kind of just questioning life and existence as it was. I wasn't really too sure about the answers. I feel like this, because my near-death experience happened over 30 years ago, I feel like now I understand a little bit more about it. But I really started to ask these big questions around, what is the meaning of life? Is this life planned? Who are we really? Are we our bodies? Are we physical spirit? I asked questions like, do we have a life purpose? Because I felt like everything was okay. So if everything was okay, why did I come back? I'm lying in the hospital bed and I'm wondering, why did I come back from that beautiful white light? Why didn't I stay there? Did I, on some level, get a subconscious choice to come back? Because I don't remember having one. If I planned all of this to happen, then why did I choose to come back? Why did I plan that I would come back? And I started to think about all of the people around me and how all of our lives intersect, how they all overlap, how we're all connected to each other. And I felt very, very connected to people. I felt connected to the nurses. I felt connected to my family. I felt connected to everybody on such a deep level, on such a way that was so much more than just we were in the same room at the same time, or they were helping me, or my family were visiting me. It was this deeper, I'm going to say, a spiritual connection. I felt like we were all in this together. We'd planned it. We all had a purpose. Everything was how it's supposed to be because it was a bigger picture thing. And whilst I didn't understand, I knew that we were connected. So if I had a life purpose, I'm lying there in the hospital bed thinking, what is it? What could my purpose possibly be? Because at that stage, I felt like I was pretty useless. I felt like I was a bit of a burden. There was a lot of stuff going on physically, and I didn't feel like I offered the world very much at all. So what was my life purpose going to be? And this had two elements to it, because on one hand, I felt very connected. I felt very aware of the bigger picture, that life is a really big thing, that we come and we go, that moments, all of our life is made up of all of these moments. And I think we take life quite seriously. I think I learned to look for the positive sides. Like I say, I was lying there and it wasn't positive all the time. I was paralyzed. I was pretty angry at my situation. And then on the other side of that, feeling like it was the perfect situation. So I became very aware of the big picture of life, but I also became very aware of every tiny little moment that we have and what that looks like. I became aware of this feeling that every moment is so significant because it's the building blocks of another moment, of another thing, and that everything we do today is what we get for tomorrow. And this came down into my healing in practical ways. So my father was amazing. He used to come in and he used to sit with me. So I'll just backtrack a little bit. He was there in my near-death experience. And this is very, very unusual because he was alive at the time. And in near-death experiences, we often hear of people who have these experiences. They meet with their past loved ones, or they meet with deceased relatives, or whoever it may be, people that have passed on from this reality here, from this world here. But my father was still alive and he was there trying to squeeze my hand. And so when I woke up, I asked him, were you there? Were you trying to squeeze my hand? Were you calling me back? And he said no. He had been outside of the hospital room. He had tried to keep some distance because I'm sure you can imagine, as a parent, when your child is going through these types of things, it's not so easy. It's quite difficult to be there with them. He sat outside the room and other people would come in. So when I was asking him this, he had no recollection of what I was talking about. And that was where the questions really started to come up for me, because I was thinking, well, if I saw him, if I felt him, well, I didn't see him. I couldn't find him. If he was there in that experience, what does that mean? So my father used to come in all the time into the hospital every day. He'd come and sit with me. And I made this decision that if I was going to fulfill my life purpose, if I was going to have any future at all, that was going to be around being able to get my mobility back, being able to live a life. I felt like a burden, so I wanted to reduce that. So I wanted to put all of my energy into making myself be able to do things in this life. So it started with my father coming in, and I said, every day that you come in, I'm going to show you one thing that I couldn't do the day before. And as I said these words, I was a little bit nervous. I was a little bit anxious of how am I going to do this? Anyway, he would come in. It was usually mid to late morning. He'd come and he'd sit on the chair next to the bed. And I'll remember this chair forever because it had little stitching lines down the fabric. And I remember he would come in. And the first few days, I couldn't do anything. It was things like I allowed the nurse to clean my teeth with, it was like a stick with a little fabric thing on the end, that I could bear that. And for me, that was progress. For me, that was being able to progress into being able to walk and run and do all the things that I needed to do if I had this life purpose ahead of me. And so he would come in every day, and eventually it turned into I could twitch little fingers and I could open and close my hand. One day he came in, I was then sitting in the seat, so he had to sit on the bed, and I would play little jokes on him. I learnt that every little minute thing has a massive impact. So if I wanted to learn how to walk and run and drive and be independent and do all of these things to fulfill my life purpose, I was going to have to start with the tiniest of things, the tiniest little actions, the tiniest intentions. Even just being able to smile at somebody was going to make a difference. And so that's where I learnt how much control we have in our current moments. Now, our purpose may not be to move about and do things. Our purpose may be to go through some kind of experience so that the people around us can learn. For me, I really felt like I was going to move again. I felt like I was going to be active. I was going to be able to walk again. I was going to be able to do all of these things. And so that's where my attention went. I felt like if we have a life purpose, how do we know what that is? And I think some of us know. I'd had this beautiful experience. I felt like when I came back, I knew things. I just couldn't explain it. I just knew things. I had like a level of intuition. I had a level of understanding things before they were spoken, before they happened. And I couldn't turn that on and off. It was just a thing that happened. It didn't happen all the time. It happened sometimes. And so I didn't necessarily know what my purpose was. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew that I was going to give life a really good go at trying to work that out. And I understood that it's the tiniest little things that open up opportunity. It's when we feel connected. It's smiling at somebody when they're having a rough day. It just diffuses something. It just raises vibration. It makes everybody feel a bit happier. It changes something. And it sounds like such a tiny, insignificant thing. But I think through my experience, I learnt that the insignificant things are the most significant things. So I set about going, what is my life purpose? Do we all have a life purpose? If we are, well, are we our bodies or are we our spirit? I came to the conclusion pretty quickly that I was more about who I was in that white light than who I was in the hospital bed. Because that felt so real. That felt amazing. I feel like we are spiritual beings. And so our bodies are so, so important. We need to respect the fact that we're here having this physical experience. And that's where I felt like everything was how it should be, that I had planned this somehow, somewhere. I was okay with what I was going through. Not all the time. It was quite hard sometimes, but in general, I was okay with what I was going through. It was a little bit tough. There was a lot of learning curves. There was frustration. There was extreme fatigue and tiredness. I missed out on a whole lot of life, but I felt like it was all meant to be. And so if we are spiritual beings in the physical body, we need to really embrace this physical experience. So I started to embrace this physical experience, understanding that part of a life is planned and that I believe we all have a purpose. Didn't know what the purpose was. I think a lot of people don't know what their purpose is. But if we can just live with good intention, if we can open our heart and be all that we could be, then that would be a good thing. So I set the intention that I would be positive. I set the intention that I would be the smiley one when people walked in the room, that I would look for the good, that I would look for love, because I think that actually changes so much of what happens in the world. If we can look for the positive and we can live with love in our hearts. we change atmospheres. You'd hear about people who walk into a room and they change the room. The room either lights up or it can go the other way. They can just bring the energy, the vibration in that room down. People feel like the atmosphere changes. So I wanted to be somebody who brought positivity because I felt like that was connected to my life purpose. Okay, so then I thought about what really matters. What really matters is that we do our best. We can get so hung up on little details, and trust me, I do not have this worked out. I really don't. But I think we take life so incredibly seriously. And on one hand, I think we should. And on the other hand, I feel like we need to just have a bit of fun. We need to just let life be. We can't control it so much because we've either pre-planned it anyway, or we need to relax and just embrace this physical experience that we're having. So I started to ask questions about what really matters. And I think what really matters is that we live fully, that we embrace our moments, that we live with love in our hearts, and that we aim to do things with the right intention and have integrity. I very much tried to tap into a spiritual side. Even at 12 years old, I had been raised in an environment where there wasn't a whole lot of spiritual influence, spiritual thinking. That wasn't something I'd been exposed to very much. So I set out on a mission to try and pray. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know what that looked like. Try and pray, try and be happy, try and look for the good, try and be positive, and try and have the most in this physical experience. So I think what really matters is how we treat people, because I noticed when I treated people really well, even though I was having quite a hard physical experience, things seemed better than when I didn't treat people well. And so this is the same today when we're in our jobs. If we can treat people well, if we're at the supermarket and we can be kind to the cashier or to the people working there, if we can just show a bit of love and kindness and be a little bit positive and happy, we can change everything. But I'm not saying to fake it. If you genuinely don't feel it, then that's a whole nother conversation that we need to have around how we can adapt that. But I think what really matters is that we embrace this physical experience that we're having. And we do that with love and integrity. Okay, lots of questions I asked. I asked, why do we fear death? Because if I went up to this beautiful white light, if I went and experienced these amazing vibrations, and it was just overwhelmingly wonderful. I can't even put it into words. But if that's what death is, why do we fear that? I was quite happy to go and try that again. I was quite happy to stay there when I was there. Like I said, I didn't necessarily get a choice to come back. But I really questioned in the hospital, because hospitals are a place where death happens. Death is often seen as a failure, as something where things went wrong, as we didn't perform, we didn't do good enough. And I was thinking, don't you know, death's amazing. And so I started to question what that really was like. I think we fear death because of the unknown. Because do I know that I'll go back there? I believe so, but do I know? We don't know. People haven't necessarily been there. We fear death because it's massive change, it's loss, it's grief, it's real. And so by no means do I want to, what's that word? I forget my words, that's the other thing. Make death seem less important. By no means do I want to say grief is not real or that we need to move on or move through it quickly. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that death, I think, can be beautiful. I think when we embrace the concept of death, we can absolutely, truly learn how to live. And so lying in the hospital bed thinking, why is death a failure? Why is death seen as such a bad thing? Raised a lot of questions for me for a start. But I think we are here to have this experience. So let's not shortchange that. Let's truly live this experience. But if we understand that this experience is temporary, then I think we can truly learn how to live. We learn how to live understanding that we are a spiritual being as well as a physical being, that perhaps we've planned some of our life. We live knowing that the smallest of things can have the biggest of impact, and that actually whilst I think there's some major things that happen in our life that we have no control over, I think the majority of day-to-day living and the way that we feel in this world, we can have a fair bit of control over. Not completely, but some control. So all of these amazing things, I think that we need to talk about death. And I've thought that since lying in that hospital bed, thinking, what was that white light? What was that? Overall, I think we need to love, we need to be kind, and we need to have gratitude. Gratitude became a massive part of my healing process. Now, I still continue to ask question after question after question after question because I'm so curious, but I think it's okay to question. I think it's okay to ask things, and more than anything, we need to have love, and we need to understand we're here in this physical experience. I don't have any certain knowledge. I don't have anything particularly special because this experience happened to me. But I do know that life is something beautiful and that we should embrace it fully and live out each of our moments with a really kind and generous heart. So that was a couple of questions that I had summed up very quickly. I'm really looking forward to some Q&A. I hope that that has been helpful for people. And Ingrid, I'll hand back over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. This was wonderful. I love to hear all these incredible experiences. So now I am going to introduce our next speaker. He's Dr. Brian Sackett. He has had multiple spiritually transformative experiences. He had a near-death experience falling out of a moving car when he was just 3 years old. Dr. Brian Sackett has a PhD in transpersonal psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. And he's a psychologist previously in private practice in San Jose, California, and is a recent Toronto, Canada resident. Brian serves on the board of directors of Spiritual Awakenings International. So let's welcome Dr. Brian Sackett.
Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you all for coming. And thank you, Kirsty, for riveting talk, and I look forward to the question and answers together. I'll share the screen in a minute, but I wanted to start out with the framework a little bit. So David Lorimore in the previous presentation said that it wasn't whether you had proof of these kinds of experiences that really mattered. It's whether you had experiences that changed you, and then you get it. But what I want to talk about, I did have such an experience when I was 3 years old, but it wasn't clear. What happened wasn't clear to me. There was a lot of it that was totally unconscious. And so how do you deal with that? It became a mystery to me that I had to unravel. And I spent many years in my life doing that. So PMH Atwater, who is probably the preeminent childhood near-death experience, says that people who have a near-death experience at age 5 or under often will take 30, 40, 50 years to unpack that, understand it, and assimilate it. And I share that experience. So this is like the car that I was riding in. I was 3.5 years old. We lived in Columbus, Ohio at the time. And I was in the back seat of this car, which, as you can see, the doors open forward instead of the normal ways that cars' doors open. And in those days of no seat belts, that was dangerous. I was in the back seat with my brother, who was a couple years older than I was. My mom and dad were in the front seat, and my next younger brother was 1 year old at the time. He was up there with them. My older brother and I were messing around playing, and I must have bumped the door handle, and the car door was sucked open by the wind, and it pulled me out. Now, my parents told me, look, when you were 3 years old, you fell out of a car. They gave you 10 stitches in the top of your head and you were fine. But over time, I began to see that that wasn't true. And in fact, I started noticing that I had some clues that I was not okay. So some of those clues were I was uneasy in social situations as a child. And some of this, I'm sure, is not just from the car experience, but how it was in my family growing up and other factors. But this was a big part of that. I was always searching for more. I felt out of place. I didn't feel like I fit in with other kids. And in fact, what I did was started to read everything I could read. And often I read fantasy and science fiction. And the goal of that was to take me out of where I was, off into some other world. And I would go live there. I wanted to be held. I wanted to be comforted. Sometimes I noticed that I was more fearful than maybe the situation warranted. Sometimes I had feelings of not being okay and not being good enough. And then there's also the sense that there was more to life than I had been told. But what I did to cope with all this is I put on a strong front, a very capable front. And I think I just kind of bottled up inside all this. Now, my undergraduate degree was in mathematics at Stanford University, and I had an experience when my senior year at Stanford where I went out of time and space through going to a presentation by Baba Ram Dass and Swami Muktananda. It put me into a strongly altered state of consciousness. I touched transcendence, but I had this very distinct feeling then that my life had been divided up into several different parts. From when I was born until I was 3.5 and fell out of the car. That was one major demarcation line. Then, from then until this experience with Muktananda, and then my life after that. But I didn't know why. Why was this 3.5-year-old experience so strong? So this is a picture of me on the right there. And if you look at my face, you can see that I was pretty much carefree. I looked happy. And I think that's truly how I was at that time. And this is not long after that falling out of the car experience. I was still 3 years old. And I think if you look closely at my face there, there's a wariness. There's a sort of an alertness, or I'm really watching and making sure things are okay. And there's care there, there's concern there. So I really didn't begin unpacking this until many years later. I worked in high tech in the compute industry for many years, and I found eventually that I was just working for the money. There wasn't very much heart in this. So I decided I would go back to graduate school. And while I was in graduate school in psychology, I wanted to become a psychologist. There was a very good hypnotherapist who was a professor at the school. And he did a couple of regressions, hypnotic regressions. And what I experienced in those regressions was, first of all, an overwhelming amount of physical pain. And it was particularly in my lungs or in my breathing. each breath I took felt like I was breathing through cut glass. And it was agonizing. Now, what I suspect happened is when I fell out of the car, I hit on my head, on my back, but that it kind of caved in my chest and it probably tore some cartilage there. Another thing I did in graduate school was I joined an intensive psychodrama training. And I did that for 5 years, and we practiced on each other. So a psychodrama would be a small scenario that you do, and often there's a natural regression back into earlier states of consciousness or childhood states even. One day I was being the protagonist in this psychodrama, and I found myself, for no reason I could figure out consciously, I was lying on my back on the floor, reaching up, and I could tell that I was reaching for my mom, but that's all I knew about it at that time. So I was getting these little clues that, okay, something really significant happened back in this time. And so I called up my mom and dad, who were in Minnesota at the time, and I asked them to step through bit by bit what had happened in that experience. So they did that, and they told me, okay, so you fell out of the car. My older brother said, Brian's gone. And they turned around, they came back, they found that I was in the arms of a truck driver who had been following behind our car, and there was blood everywhere because I had a scalp wound, and scalp wounds bleed. I had been knocked unconscious, so I was unconscious and bleeding. They loaded me into the car, and this was in rural Wisconsin. It was a 2-lane road, and it had gravel shoulders. That's where I fell. The truck driver said I hit the gravel with my head. So they drove, and they had to drive about 30 miles to the first place they could get some medical attention for me. And they got to this little clinic. The nurses took me away. My mom and dad went into the restroom, and they both had diarrhea and threw up. They vomited. And so that gives you an idea of how scared and how affected they were by what was going on and not knowing what was happening to me. The nurse told my mom that when I woke up in this room, I started thrashing around and screaming. And I had my first memory at that point. And the memory was this is what I saw. It's just this extremely brilliant, bright light. And I could feel the light. I could feel being in the light. But I also was scared. I had, become conscious after probably being out for more than an hour of unconsciousness. And in those days, so what they did when I was screaming, they wrapped me up in a sheet and they tied me down. And they don't tell 3-year-old kids what they're doing. They just work on you. And I saw a nurse in white carrying a white bowl, and there were very bright lights in this clinic, and it reflected off the bowl, and it scared me, and I started crying. They did stitch me up. They gave me back to my parents. They said, he probably has a concussion. Make sure he doesn't fall asleep. But they drove another 8 or 10 hours to get back to Columbus, Ohio. And I was put on the seat of that car, in the back seat, and my mom was sitting there. She put a pillow on her lap, and I put my head on the pillow, or they put me on the pillow, and they started driving. And my mom said, you would sometimes cry and reach your arms up and want to be comforted. But I was so afraid that you had been broken or damaged, that you were so fragile, I was afraid to hold you and touch you and comfort you. And the emotional pain of that was actually more painful than the physical pain of that. And I discovered that later on, I thought my mom had turned away from me, probably because I was messing around and it was my fault that I had fallen out of the car. But somehow, unconsciously, I generalized this to thinking that God didn't love me, that the divine had turned away from me. And again, all of this is unconscious. I'm not aware of it as I'm growing up. I'm not aware of it until, 37 years later. I'm beginning to become aware of it. And it takes me a number of more years to unpack what was going on. So I'm sure that this unconsciously affected my desire to be a psychologist, to become a psychologist. And I ended up specializing, working with adults who, as children, had trauma and had abuse or very traumatic experiences. And I learned how to help people to integrate what had happened to them and to heal from the trauma that had happened to them. And I learned a lot from my own experiences of trying to reach back and find out what was going on with this. And when, as an adult, I would go back and try to feel my young little boy, I would veer away from him. I would either veer away from him because it was too painful to feel what he was feeling, or I would unconsciously become him. In either case, if I veer away as an adult or I don't, I become him, healing doesn't happen because there's no witnessing of what's going on. There's no awareness. So I learned that in order to heal trauma, the adult has to, or it really helps to, turn into inner resources, and particularly that white light, particularly the soul that I am. When I am held in that, the stillness, the peace, the love, my adult can be held in that. My young child can be held in that. And then as an adult, I can tolerate feeling what he's feeling without the emotional intensity of it needing to be numbed out. So what I discovered over these many years is that I indeed became the light. The light wasn't outside of me. The light was me. And in fact, it's what all of us are. And as Kirsty was saying in her part, we are these transcendent beings, but we're in a physical body. So living becomes being that light, but being that light while you're aware of what's happening in your body, your personality, your ego as well. And in fact, this has deepened over time to where so for instance, in February, I slipped on black ice and I broke my ankle pretty badly. When I was dealing and am still dealing with whatever residual pain there is from that experience, I go into my spiritual core and I go into the stillness, into the silence, into the love, into the light. And I become more present to what's happening. So both on a physical level, if there is sensory nerve inputs of pain, or on an emotional level, that stillness and silence, that outside of time space-ness, that I think Betty Eady this morning was calling the matrix, that can hold these kinds of experiences. And what I need to know gets revealed as I'm sitting there quietly and I'm having the presence of my beingness amplify. Me, the little personality, is not doing any of those things. But if I'm paying attention, then I can do that. And so some of my takeaways of this experience are that there was a profound change in me because of falling out of the car. One of the things when I went back to graduate school and realized these things were coming up in me, is I worked with a therapist named Bonnie Greenwell, who passed away this last January. And Bonnie was an expert in Kundalini awakenings. And she had told me, so I was feeling Kundalini kinds of experiences. I was getting strong kriyas that looked like grand mal seizures. I would thrash around on my bed for 45 minutes to an hour and a half, completely out of my conscious control. My hands would do these strange movements that I couldn't duplicate consciously. They would assume different positions. And a few times I even heard myself saying words that in a language I didn't understand, which I've come to see, to know as Sanskrit. So I was working with Bonnie to try to understand all of this. And she said she thinks that when I fell out of a car, that's one of the ways that Kundalini that process can be initiated. And for me, it was in a very low level. It was kind of like a trickle. In fact, there's been this sort of veiled feeling for so many years of these different awakening kinds of experiences. But it's important to unpack those. It's important to begin to understand what happened, how did it happen, and as Christy was saying, who or what are we? And I've come to learn that we are indeed both small beings, small human beings, including that little kid me. And we are also these infinite balls of light energy that exist simultaneously with our human perspective. And part of the point of all this is to get to that place of understanding, or of being. It's not understanding, it's beingness, where we are simultaneously both a human being and a transcendent being. And there's a co-creative aspect to that, where this universal transcendent us uniquely manifests as an individual human being. And that individual human being, and what I'm learning and growing through, does affect and even help the transcendent part of us evolve. One of the ways that this whole childhood experience got healing started was I was down in Brazil, and I had a spiritually transformative experience down there where I was under a waterfall, and when I first went under that waterfall, it was like, bam, I couldn't breathe. I waited for a while, right outside the waterfall on the creek bed by. And when I was sitting there, I'm not usually visual in my inner um, experiences, but this time I saw my little 3-year-old boy. He was out maybe a couple feet in front of me. He had his arms spread out like he was on a cross or something. He was looking at me. He looked at me right in the eyes, and then he rotated 180 degrees, and he came back into my body. Now, one of the things I've learned is that trauma is stored in the body. But often it's encapsulated in a way that our thinking mind, our part of us that doesn't make sense, or that makes sense of things, can't access that. And shamanically, they would say, okay, I had a soul fragment split off, right? And some 50 years later, he came back into me, that soul fragment came back and integrated. So my intention in sharing all of this with you folks is for any of you who have had spiritually transformative experiences that may have been traumatic or include an element of trauma, or it's not been clear, it's been very fuzzy, to encourage you to be with it by going into your spiritual core, into the part of us that doesn't sort it into good or bad, doesn't compare. It's just mindfully with what is, and be with the presence and the stillness and the love and the peace that's inside of each of us. And these things that are all cloudy and murky will actually become clearer. Now, in healing trauma, we don't forget the memories. I still remember a lot of the pain of all this, especially the emotional pain. I saw how over the years, among other things, that affected my intimate relationships with my partners, because some little part of me was unconsciously wanting maternal comforting and love. And yet I learned through all this that you can't find that out there. You find it inside of you. The adult you can give the young child you that love and comfort and the missing experience of being loved and accepted exactly as you are, even with all that pain and brokenness. So my hopes are that this will help anyone that has some of these kinds of experiences, to encourage you to, sit with them, bring them into this deeper spiritual place in you, and let them heal, and let it all be brought into conscious awareness, and that's possible, and that what it will do is connect maybe some disconnected, hurt young parts and also other adult parts with this deeper soul and spirit that's each of us. And we'll not forget the memories, but we will be able to let go of the unconscious defenses. We won't need to numb emotionally anymore. We can trust ourselves. We can trust other people. We can trust God. So I think that's it for me. I look forward to the question and answers, and I appreciate your attention. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Brian. This was incredible. There's so many beautiful comments. Thank you to both of you, like people loving the sharing, and it opens the door for helping our children. So many understandings. And me as an experiencer, for me, is like knowing that these things also happen to many more people, and that I had so many questions and things were so hard. I want to just ask the first question. And I encourage everybody to ask questions in the chat, so we can keep feeding from all this wisdom. But I want to ask, and in my case, having like Dr. Brian, a near-death experience at the age of 3, almost 3 years old. After that and growing up, I felt very different from everyone else. I want to know, you guys had the same kind of sentiment of feeling different from everybody else, and how you were able to deal with this. So maybe if Kirsty can share with us first.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. Thank you, Ingrid. Absolutely. Felt like I just didn't quite fit in. I can't explain it. I didn't fit out, but yeah, I really struggled. I don't know, I resonated so much with what you talked about there, Brian. So that was just fabulous. I think I spent a lot of time trying to go back to that light, trying to find my acceptance there, because I didn't particularly accept myself. I felt, like I said earlier, I felt like I was a bit of a burden, that I was a responsibility for people. So there was that level of, in terms of my family and my friendships, but just in everyday life, I often felt like socially, I just didn't quite fit in. I didn't know why. I was doing the same as everybody else. I was just trying to be there. So yeah, I think, and I find this today as well, but when I go back to that light, like Brian was saying as well, that's where I feel like I am who I am, and that's got to be good enough, because that's all I've got. And so if I don't fit in, then I go, well, that's okay, because there'll be a reason for that. So it's not always easy, but yeah, absolutely, that's been a thing that I've struggled with, still struggle with in different situations. And then I try and find the environments where I do fit in, try and find where I feel positive and feel connection with people, and focus on those rather than why don't I fit in. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Now, Dr. Brian.
Well, I hope I conveyed in my talk, I don't know how clearly it came through, but that there was a split experience going on. There was a split between what I consciously knew and what I unconsciously knew. And part of the gift of this near-death experience was, on a deep unconscious level, I knew the oneness, and I felt a lot of love. I felt connected and loved. But on a conscious level, I felt the opposite. I felt very different than the other kids. They didn't relate to what I was talking about, a lot of the time, and I didn't completely relate to what they were talking about. And so it was an experience for me, I think, of hiding out inside of me for a long time, and peering out sometimes and wanting to be loved and wanting to be loving, but also being a little pulled back. And yet there was this deeper experience that, I knew there was more to life. I knew there was more to me than what I was living. And so it was kind of a push-pull, and I think that reflects the paradoxical nature of non-duality, right? Because we are simultaneously these transcendent, unified one being, and we are these sort of broken, fragmented little parts that don't experience that. We're both. And so that's my answer.
Wow. Thank you so much. We have a question here, one for Kirsty and one for Brian. Let's go with the one for Kirsty first. Is how did you resolve not being a gymnastic anymore?
To be honest, I don't think I have resolved that. I still try. I'm terrible at it. I've still got this in my heart. I've even done adult gymnastic classes, the very basics. I go to a gym where we have bars and we have things, and I'm always hanging off them. I'm always still hopeful that I could do what I used to be able to do. I can't, and that's okay, but I haven't quite given up. I haven't resolved it because this was the passion of my life. I just lived for being active and doing a gymnastic routine around the house. My mother says I couldn't walk in a straight line because I had to go halfway up the wall, then go on my hands, then go over the couch. And she said I couldn't walk in a straight line. So I haven't quite resolved it, but I've come to the understanding that I think it goes back to, was this planned? When I asked this question, I think this was planned for me. So I have an element of, I've accepted that my body won't do what I do. When I go to the gym and we're all lifting weights and I'm literally just on the skinny little bar and I'm embarrassed, I'll be honest. I find it embarrassing. It's humiliating in some days. But at the same time, I'm like, but I can walk and I can get up and I can breathe and I can do things. So that's where the gratitude kicks in. And I think having gratitude is really, really important. But I haven't resolved it. I struggle with things every single day. My hand still has fine motor movement issues. So it is what it is, basically. Yeah. Great question.
Thank you. We have a question for Brian. The question is, wow, can you please repeat the part of the story in the back seat after the injury with your mother that caused you to feel that God turned away from you?
Sure, thanks. And before I do that, I want to acknowledge to Kirsty that I was also a high school gymnast. And so we have something in common there. And I can't do it either. So I was in the back seat of the car. So I'm not remembering this. I was told this when I had my mom and dad walk through this with me. And I really was hurt badly. And I think that in their need to have everything be okay, maybe they couldn't see that. But I would reach out to my mom sometimes, reach up with my arms and cry and just want to be held. And she just thought I was too hurt, too fragile for her to hold me. She thought that would hurt me more. And so the result of that was that she wouldn't hold me, and I felt abandoned. I really felt like, okay, she must be mad at me because I was messing around and I fell out of the car or something. I made up stories, I think, about why she wasn't holding me. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized that at that time in my life, I unconsciously also turned away from the divine. And I think there was, in my 3-year-old consciousness, there was an equivalency between the Divine Mother and my mother. And so I just didn't feel worthy of the love and support of the divine. And so that was a profound disconnection, and I suffered because of it. But there was also this unconscious memory of the light and the overwhelming desire to be in the light or to be connected with the divine. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until many years later that all consciously came through, and I worked that through.
Oh, thank you so much. There's this beautiful comment from Tamara. She said, Kirsty, you are doing a spiritual gymnastics now. You are a walking miracle. So same thing for you, fun. Brian. So this is just so beautiful. And then I have another question here for Brian. It says, Brian, how did your meeting with Muktananda affected you? He had a profound effect on me.
Right, thank you. He certainly had a massive effect on me. In a nutshell, I I went to this meditation, this event at Stanford University, and in the fall quarter of my senior year. And in that event, the Shaktipat of Muktananda, I believe, helped me with no context. I had no understanding of all this. It got me out of time and space and out of my mind, literally, for the first time in my life. And then I had a unitive experience for days and didn't eat or sleep, and ended up being hospitalized and given antipsychotic medication. If you want to learn more about that, all that experience, I did our presentation last year at last year's conference. It's still on the Spiritual Awakenings International website. It's the title is Spiritual Emergency Resolved Over 50 Years. And so you can, there's a lot more to that story, but that's it in a nutshell.
We have many more questions, but I think we just have time for one more, and I'll bring it to both of you. And the question is, do you still have the feelings that you are somehow different from other people? So we can go with Kirsty first.
Different from other people. Yes, but I think also we're all connected. I feel like we are other people. We are one. And, you know, I look at people, I love to people watch, and I look at people and I wonder what's happening in their lives. And I wonder how our connection matters, how it works. I ask a lot of questions, and I ask, you know, is it possible that we all experience every lifetime that's available? Is it possible that I can have some of that experience? Why do some people meet other people? Where do our lives overlap? So yes, I feel very separate, but also very, very connected. It's a very unusual feeling. I think we should just treat everybody with love as if we are connected. And that sounds quite simple. It's possibly not that simple. Yes, I feel still very outside, but very connected.
Thank you, Kirsty. Can you answer this question to Brian, please?
Yeah, a few years ago, a Sufi teacher friend of mine told me about an Ibn Arabi teaching that was from hundreds of years ago. But he said basically we're all a unique manifestation of the divine. And because we're each a unique manifestation of the divine, we have something uniquely to contribute to one another. And having that perspective helps me to stop being defensive and, you know, hide from people, and open and be very curious and very loving. Because I want to see their unique manifestation of this thing that we have in common. So it's a paradoxical feeling, because clearly we're all different, and yet on some level we're all the same. And yet we have this uniqueness that makes life really wonderful. Makes it brings a lot of beauty into life. So I have remnants within my personality of that scared little kid that was hurt so much, and that feels different. But I have a deeper knowing, and I'm more consciously connected now with my spirit. And so I feel the oneness, and I don't feel different at all.
Mm. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Dr. Brian. And thank you all of you for being here. This was a wonderful panel. Oh my gosh.